Hello, and welcome to Pre-Socratic philosophy. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of pre-Socratic philosophy, the thinkers who laid the groundwork for Western philosophical tradition. In this video, we'll explore how these revolutionary minds broke from mythological explanations and developed rational inquiry that would forever change how humans understand the world around them. Before we begin our journey through ancient Greece, I want to mention that all sources used in creating this video are linked in the description below for those interested in further reading. We'll be covering the intellectual achievements of these early philosophers, their approach to understanding the natural world, and why their contributions remain relevant to this day. To truly appreciate the revolutionary nature of pre-Socratic thought, we must first understand the worldview that preceded it. Before the 6th century BCE, the Greek understanding of reality was dominated by the poetic traditions of Homer and Hesiod, a world saturated with divine presence and intervention. In this mythological framework, gods and humans shared an intertwined history. Natural phenomena weren't understood as the results of impersonal forces or physical laws, but rather as direct manifestations of divine will. Storms weren't just atmospheric events, they were Zeus wielding his thunderbolts. Earthquakes weren't geological activities, they were Poseidon striking the earth with his trident. This was a world of unpredictability, where natural events were attributed to the whims and moods of the gods. Nothing could be safely predicted or systematically understood because divine intervention could alter the course of events at any moment. Explanation was narrative rather than analytical, focusing on who caused something rather than how or why in mechanical terms. The poems of Homer and Hesiod provided the Greeks with a comprehensive worldview that explained everything from the origin of the cosmos to the proper conduct of humans. Hesiod's Theogony, for instance, offered a genealogy of the gods that simultaneously explained the structure of reality. While these accounts contained elements of rationalization, they remained firmly rooted in mythological thinking. During the 6th century BCE, something remarkable began to happen in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Greek city-states, particularly those along the Ionian coast of what is now Turkey, experienced an unprecedented intellectual awakening, a new form of discourse that would eventually be called philosophy. What made this new approach revolutionary was its commitment to rational inquiry. These early thinkers began asking questions about the fundamental nature of reality. But more importantly, they sought answers through reason and observation rather than through appeals to divine authority or mythological narratives. Several factors contributed to this intellectual revolution. The democratic political systems of many Greek city-states allowed for open debate and the free exchange of ideas. Citizens could question established views without fear of religious persecution. The prosperity of trading centers like Miletus created leisure time for intellectual pursuits and exposed Greeks to ideas from other cultures. The geographical position of these Greek colonies, situated between East and West, exposed them to the scientific and mathematical achievements of older civilizations like Egypt and Babylon. Yet the Greeks transformed this knowledge by subjecting it to critical analysis and theoretical speculation. Scholar Geoffrey Lloyd has persuasively argued that the origins of Greek philosophy can be traced to the intense political debates within Greek city-states. When different factions needed to resolve disputes without resorting to violence, they had to establish common principles that all parties could accept. This practice of finding first principles and building rational arguments from them would later be applied to understanding the natural world. Our journey through pre-Socratic thought begins in the Ionian city of Miletus, home to the first recorded philosopher in Western history, Thales. Active around 585 BCE, Thales marks a pivotal moment in human intellectual development by being among the first to theorize about the underlying substance that constitutes the universe. What made Thales revolutionary wasn't just the questions he asked, but his approach to answering them. Rejecting mythological explanations, he proposed that there must be some fundamental material substance from which everything in the cosmos is derived. For Thales, this substance was water. He argued that all matter could ultimately be reduced to water. The Earth itself had emerged from water and continued to float upon it. While this conclusion might seem naive to modern ears, the method of inquiry was groundbreaking. Thales was attempting to find a natural explanation for the diversity of phenomena we observe without invoking divine intervention. Two other Milesian philosophers continued this tradition, Anaximander and Anaximenes. Anaximander rejected Thales's identification of water as the fundamental substance, proposing instead something he called the apeiron, an indefinite, boundless substance unlike any familiar material. This abstract conception shows how quickly Greek thought was advancing toward theoretical sophistication. Anaximenes, the third Milesian philosopher, identified air as the primary substance, explaining that through processes of rarefaction and condensation, air could transform into other substances. When rarefied, air becomes fire. When condensed, it gradually becomes wind, then clouds, water, earth, and finally stone. Despite their different conclusions, these three Milesian thinkers shared two important characteristics. They were monists, believing all substances could be reduced to a single fundamental element, and they were materialists, identifying this fundamental element as physical rather than spiritual or divine. The materialist approach of the Milesians found its most sophisticated expression in the atomic theory developed by Leucippus and his student Democritus in the 5th century BCE. Their theory represents one of the most remarkable intellectual achievements of the ancient world. The atomists proposed that the universe consists of an infinite number of tiny, indivisible particles, atoms moving through an infinite void. These atoms, varying in shape and size, combine and separate through their random motions to create the diverse phenomena we experience. Everything from stars to human thoughts was explained as different configurations of these fundamental particles. What makes this theory so impressive is how closely it anticipates aspects of modern atomic theory, despite being formulated without the benefit of experimental science. The atomists' vision was completely mechanistic. They explained the world without reference to purpose, design, or divine intervention. Even the human soul, they argued, was composed of particularly fine, spherical atoms. The atomists also addressed the problem of change that troubled many pre-Socratic thinkers. They proposed that while individual atoms are unchangeable and eternal, their constant motion and reconfiguration account for the changes we observe in the world. This elegant solution preserved both permanence at the fundamental level and change at the level of experience. If the question of fundamental substance dominated 6th century philosophy, the problem of change became the central philosophical issue of the 5th century BCE. This problem might seem strange to modern minds, but it arose naturally from the materialist assumptions of early Greek thought. The philosopher Parmenides of Elea developed the most radical approach to this problem. Through rigorous logical reasoning, he concluded that change is impossible and must therefore be an illusion. His argument began with the premise that something cannot come from nothing. If something new comes into existence, it must either come from something that already existed, in which case it isn't truly new, or from nothing, which is impossible. Parmenides extended this reasoning to all forms of change. If A changes into B, either B was already present in A, in which case no real change occurred, or B came from nothing, which is impossible. Therefore, change itself must be impossible. Reality, Parmenides concluded, is a single, unchanging, eternal being, and the world of change we experience is merely an illusion. Parmenides' student Zeno developed a series of paradoxes to defend his teacher's conclusions. His most famous, the stadium paradox, argued that motion is impossible because to move from point A to point B, one must first reach the halfway point, and before that, the quarter-way point, and so on infinitely. Since one cannot traverse an infinite number of points in finite time, Zeno concluded that motion is impossible. These arguments were not mere sophistry, but represented a serious attempt to resolve contradictions in early Greek materialism. They forced subsequent philosophers to develop more sophisticated theories to account for both permanence and change. Not all pre-Socratic philosophers were strict materialists or monists. Empedocles of Acragas proposed that the universe is composed of 4 eternal elements: earth, air, fire, and water, which he called roots. These elements combine and separate under the influence of 2 cosmic forces: love, which brings the elements together, and strife, which drives them apart. Empedocles' theory addressed the problem of change by suggesting that while the fundamental elements themselves don't change, their combinations do. What appears to be generation and destruction is merely the mixing and separation of these eternal elements. This theory preserved both the permanence demanded by Parmenidean logic and the reality of change that our senses report. The Pythagorean school, founded by the legendary Pythagoras, took a radically different approach. Rather than identifying a material substance as fundamental, they proposed that mathematical relationships constitute the true reality. All is number, they proclaimed, suggesting that the material world could somehow be reduced to numerical relationships. While our understanding of early Pythagorean thought is limited by fragmentary evidence, their emphasis on mathematics as the key to understanding reality would have profound influence on later philosophers, particularly Plato. Their work in music theory, where they discovered the mathematical ratios underlying musical harmonies, seemed to confirm their belief that number is the secret structure of reality. The pre-Socratic philosophers initiated a revolution in human thought that continues to reverberate today. By seeking natural explanations for natural phenomena, they laid the groundwork for both philosophy and science. Their commitment to rational inquiry, evidence, and logical argument established the methodological foundations of Western intellectual tradition. These thinkers brought human thought to a new level of abstraction, raising fundamental questions about reality, knowledge, and change that remain relevant. They cultivated a spirit of critical inquiry that refuses to accept traditional answers without examination. While Socrates would later shift philosophical focus from cosmology to ethics, the pre-Socratics' naturalistic approach to understanding the world would continue to develop through figures like Aristotle and eventually evolve into the scientific method. As we conclude our exploration of pre-Socratic thought, I hope you've gained appreciation for these pioneering thinkers who dared to question traditional wisdom and seek rational explanations for the world around them. In our next video, we'll examine how Socrates transformed the philosophical enterprise by turning attention from the cosmos to human affairs. If you enjoyed this journey through ancient Greek thought, please like this video and subscribe to Pre-Socratic Philosophy for more explorations of the history of ideas. Leave your questions and comments below, and let me know which philosophical period or thinker you'd like to explore next. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep questioning.